Do you ever feel like the immigration system in the U.S. is falling apart? I'm Abogado Josue, or Josh McCall, and welcome to the first installment of Gente Anda Preguntando. If you're wondering what the title Gente Anda Preguntando means, it comes from a song by Los Huracanes del Norte. And the phrase means, the people are asking. Today, the people are asking about parole in place. As many of you know, President Biden announced a new policy in June of 2024 aimed at keeping families together. There are many immigrants in the United States today who are stuck in kind of a no man's land. They don't have a lawful entry, which is what they need to adjust to lawful permanent resident status, but they're married to a U.S. citizen. The Keeping Families Together policy was designed to save these immigrants a very long wait time while they applied for an immigrant visa interview at the consulate in their home country. Now, that long and difficult pathway is still available, even though the new program has been put in place. Unfortunately, like many times in our national debate, immigration has become a political football. Several conservative states got together and conspired to stop this program. And unfortunately, for now at least, it has worked. A court in Texas has announced that even though you can still apply for the Parole in Place program, for the next short period of time, none of those applications can be approved. Now, what this means is that this will likely make its way up to the Supreme Court. There could be a long time before we know if parole in place, keeping families together, will even survive the courts. You may ask yourself, why would anybody hate a program called Keeping Families Together? Who would hate a program that keeps families together? The answer is racists. The people that this program was designed to help are largely non-white, largely Latino, and people who have been in the U.S. for a significant period of time. In fact, if you got married after Biden's announcement, you are already too late to take advantage of this program. This program is also only available to people who could otherwise qualify to adjust status here in the United States, but for their unlawful entry. The Parole in Place program looks at those people's records, and as long as there's no troubling criminal history present, that program is designed to grant those immigrants basically a substitute for a lawful entry, otherwise known as parole. Once you have that lawful entry, if you have a qualifying relationship, then you are eligible to adjust status here in the United States, and you don't have to go through the very time-consuming, lengthy, and risky process of going to an interview in the consulate in a country you may not have seen or visited since you were 2 or 3 years old. Imagine that you, or your spouse, or your loved one was in this situation. Your loved one entered the United States as a child, for example, when they were 5 or 6 years old. Of course, a child of 5 or 6 can't choose and tell their parents, I don't want to cross this border. In fact, many of these immigrants have been here before they even knew that they were an immigrant. What would you want to have in place so that you could provide stability to your family? Well, that's the same desire and the same instinct that immigrant families have. Immigrant families are no different from other families. They have their own problems, but they love one another, and they're there for one another for the long term. President Biden's solution, while not really earth-shattering, after all, many of those people could have simply waited a little bit longer to go to their immigrant visa interview overseas, it does provide a faster process, generally a cheaper process, and it avoids that huge risk of leaving the country. What we have to do now is to wait and see. Nobody can predict the current Supreme Court's decision, probably more so than at any other time in U.S. history. Who would have predicted 2 or 3 years ago that the U.S. Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade? The big question is, if you are possibly eligible for this program that is now frozen in place, what should you do? I'll tell you what I've been advising my clients. Most of these clients, like I mentioned earlier, are eligible to apply for an immigrant visa interview. And if you've been waiting around to do that, I suggest that you go ahead and start. After all, that program's already here. And even though it takes a very long time to get that immigrant visa after you get a waiver, it's better to start now than later. In fact, let's say you start the process. You can always later apply for parole in place. Big risk for immigrants is paying money and taking a gamble. Nobody can promise you what the Supreme Court is going to do with this program. They might very well find that it is illegal. If they do, then the money you paid to your attorney for getting this application approved doesn't necessarily get refunded to you. In other words, you have money at stake. It is a bet at this point. Every immigration attorney is handling this differently. But for me, it's very important to manage clients' expectations. I hate the way politicians play with immigration like it's a political football. And that's exactly what President Biden was doing when he made this announcement. He had been hard on immigrants for several months. He had done some Trumpian things in the field of immigration. And then he realized that his numbers were not so good among people who support immigrants. So he announced this program for political purposes. And I sincerely hope that it eventually helps people. However, I don't like to bet, and I don't like to risk my clients' money. So if my clients are not in a huge hurry to get this parole in place filed, then I've been recommending that they start with the already existing program, which would include an I-130, that is to prove the relationship between you and your relative. Number 2, a waiver called an I-601A that takes care of a lot of the punishments that you would receive if you were to leave the country. So what's at stake? Let's say that you take advantage of the already existing program, filing your I-130, filing the waiver, waiting 4 or 5 years, and then requesting an immigrant visa interview if that waiver is approved. Well, really what's at stake is most probably under a year worth of wait. Because these PIP applications, the parole in place applications, are pretty quick. They don't take that long to process. And you haven't lost really anything if you start the other process. In fact, if you start under the currently existing process, you know at the very least that one day you're going to get a shot at an application to be able to go get an immigrant visa interview. What I've been recommending is that my clients begin with the currently existing program that we know that exists, and then if the Supreme Court does not overturn the parole in place program, then just switch. After all, much of the evidence that you would use in the currently existing process is really useful in a parole in place application. Furthermore, once you get approved for the parole in place program, then they will simply cancel your I-601A application. After all, you don't need one anymore. You can stay right here with your family, and you do not have to go back to a country that you probably haven't been to in years. I sincerely hope this program ends up saving immigrants time, money, and risk. Because after all, immigration is crucial to our country, both to its economy and its culture. What makes us human makes us equal. Let's build more bridges, not walls.